Welcome to Ranting and Raving. It is Super Bowl week. My team definitely ain't in it. And that means it's finally time to start talking about the future. Um, a lot of draft conversation really comes around this time of year. We just finished the Senior Bowl. The Combine's around the corner. The Super Bowl is on Sunday. Now is really where you start to pick up steam. And definitely going to be a lot of draft related content coming through the channel here over the coming weeks and months, up until April. With that said, there is one position group in particular that I simply don't really care about what they do with the combine because it's just not really that relevant. There's plenty of other positions where it does matter as far as like creating projections and things like that. And that's, of course, the quarterback position. This isn't every quarterback in the class. And this is also not predicting where I think guys are going to go. It's where I would take them and why. So that's really what I'm going to focus on. I really tried to, and pretty much all of the draft content I'm going to do over the coming weeks is going to be focused around really the first several rounds. Um, guys who I really don't see going until the fourth or fifth round. I'm not even watching. And again, there's plenty of guys you've heard of, and I maybe haven't, and I want to watch them, and that's okay. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into the draft. None of these are really in order, but we're going to start with the first quarterback I want to talk about here. So Shador is a very interesting prospect to me in that two things can be true at once is one of my favorite expressions. It's something a lot of people seem to struggle with. The interesting thing with Shador is you could argue that some of his hype comes from his last name. But you could also say, really meaningfully, and I think honestly, if you look at his play and his body of work, there's a pretty good chance that Shador goes to a better school and a better program with better offensive coaching. Not necessarily better weapons, because especially by this year, they actually had a good receiving core at Colorado. Um, their offensive system, to me, I think it's terrible. I think it didn't do a whole lot to prepare him to be a pro. We'll get into it in a minute, but I think there's some other things in his particular background that compensate for that. But you could really make a case that yes, his name being as hot as it is at times is because of who his dad is, which just in case anyone doesn't know, his dad's Deion Sanders, the greatest quarterback of all time and an absolute legend. But Shador does a lot of things at an exceptionally high level, especially for a college player. Now, some of that comes into, like, we know because he's told us, he's spent time with Tom Brady in the off season. Like, he's spent time around great quarterbacks. He's gotten personal coaching. He's gone to all the camps. He's done all the things. Obviously, his dad being his dad, like, he's had access to those things. And credit to him, he's put in the work necessary to make all those advantages matter. Shador is not a guy who would be a top five pick in every class because while there are some things he does exceptionally well, he doesn't have an incredibly strong arm. He's not a particularly good athlete. Um, the things he really does well is, and I don't mean this sarcastically, he just plays the quarterback position well. And that is something that a lot of times actually gets discounted, especially going into the draft. My friend Adam, who co-hosts the Saints Party podcast, has asked in the Discord multiple times, what does he do great? What makes him special? Like those types of questions. And I'm not being a smartass. My answer to that is he plays quarterback. The job of the quarterback is to deliver the ball on time, on target, with accuracy and consistency, to execute the given offense at the highest level possible. That's what Shador does. Now, Shador isn't a guy who You build the entire offense and the system around his unique talents, like a Josh Allen, like a Lamar Jackson. He's, to a degree, now he's a better athlete, but that's a low bar. But, the guy who, he's mentioned that he's learned from, a guy like Tom, a guy like Drew, Peyton less so because again, Peyton was the system. And not putting him in that echelon. I just mean like stylistically by type archetype. Shador is exceptionally accurate. He's accurate on the move. He's accurate in the pocket. He actually maneuvers very well in the pocket. He has good feet. He's tough as hell, but he also he occasionally gets blasted. He definitely holds on to the ball too long. Now, what's interesting though is because I do think a lot of that had to do with their offense. It was a very vertical offense. Um, the route concepts, other stuff they do, there wasn't a lot of layups in that offense unless one of those receivers just straight up won it, which happened plenty. But um, like I said, I wasn't really impressed with the offense they ran all year. With Shador, when they would go, when they would do like 2 minute drill or get into comebacks or things like that, that's really where you started to see him shine because it would be back foot hits, balls out, and it would be right where you want it to be, damn near every time. And those are the things that are actually going to project the league. It doesn't have the strongest arm in the world. Go watch the game winner he threw against Baylor. He rotates across his body, barely resets his feet, throws it 50 yards down the field, right into the receiver's hands. You're not going to make a throw bigger, like longer than that, more than once or twice a game. So he's got plenty of arm. Got plenty of arm to throw to the opposite hash. Doesn't have a cannon, of the all-time great quarterbacks, you'd argue the only two that have, the only one that really has a cannon is Patrick. I don't, depending on how you feel about Favre, there's two. Um, I don't consider Aaron Rodgers one of the all-time great quarterbacks, by the way. That's why he's not on the list. Different conversation for a different time. So I will include this for each of these. Here's essentially my thoughts. So anybody wants to screenshot and heckle me later, you can. But essentially summing it up here. So that's really Shador. By the way, interest level, again, these are all for me. Gimme is the highest rating. A gimme player is simply a guy where if they are available to you wherever you are drafting, you run to the podium. And the hope is you have multiple players on your board who fit that qualification, and it's just picking the one you think will have the greatest net impact on your team. That's proper drafting. So now let's talk about the next guy. I'm sorry, friends of his, for picking this photo. I saw this photo and I just could not let this man live this down. I mean, there are many, many, many things that we all, or at least people with decency and self respect, wish had died and never came back. And the mullet it's got to be on that list. Um, my interest level in Quinn Ewers is low. I would not take him. Now, first, I believe he is going to go in the second or the third round, but I would not take him until the fourth or later. Here's why. Um, A, he consistently folded in pressure situations. So when he went against the better teams and he got pressured, not looking great against constant pressure is one thing. Like, that's kind of the point of pressure. Completely imploding consistently in those situations. Not being able to, especially in college, where this happens a lot more in college. In the pros, it's a lot harder to do. Not quote unquote putting the cape on and being Superman, like not really having those things in your bag. It's something where, okay, well, that's not really a strength. That's questionable. In the case of the handling of pressure, like that's a weakness. Then it's like, okay, well, what does he have to compensate for that? Well, he is accurate. I don't think he's as accurate as Shador, but he's definitely an accurate guy. He's a better athlete than Sanders is, for sure. Um, especially you look at him like pre the injury. Okay, solid athlete for the quarterback position. Doesn't have a particularly strong arm. Played in a really, really talented offense. Now, that's not, again, not a knock, but it brings the question of like how much was him and how much was just where you played. And generally speaking, the answer to that question comes in those high leverage moments where guys who just play in a really talented offense, when it's all on them, fold. Look at Sam Darnold this year. That's what happened with Quinn Ewers. I could be totally wrong. He could end up being a Kirk Cousins type guy where he's got these attributes and he gets a chip on his shoulder and he gets taken later than he thinks he should be, and he manifests that and has a pretty solid career. Makes an absolutely unfathomable amount of money. Kirk Cousins, like his ability and performance relative to his lifetime earnings as a pro are just bonkers. But that's really that's kind of where I am on Ewers. Like I personally just wouldn't touch him until those mid to later rounds because I don't think his strengths are strong enough to be worth the gamble, and I think his flaws are too big to ignore. There's kind of the summary on it. Cam Ward's the next guy on the list. Cam Ward's another gimme. Uh, Targeted round, really easy. I would take him first overall. Um, I would take. It depends on the draft year. So like this last draft year, you're not, at least as a prospect, you're not taking him over Caleb and you're not taking him over Jaden, but you definitely take him third, in my opinion. Um, in previous draft classes, like the year before, um, like I felt Stroud was the best quarterback in that class. I was obviously proven right. I don't think there's a huge gap prospect wise. Now they're very different players, but prospect wise, I don't think there's a huge gap between Cam Ward and CJ Stroud. I think Cam has shown, especially this last year at Miami, a lot of those most important things I talked about from quarterbacks. Handling pressure, elevating your level under high leverage, high pressure moments. Does your performance increase? Does it decrease? Um, they were the comeback kids quite a lot. The Miami team was far from perfect. Again, just in general, wins and losses, when you're looking at prospects, not the most important thing to me in the world to me, but especially I'm a big wins are not a quarterback stat guy. And so I don't really care how much he won. Like Tom Brady was a backup at Michigan. Drew Brees played at Purdue. Like a lot of these great quarterbacks were not, Patrick Mahomes, the greatest quarterback we've ever seen. He played at freaking Texas Tech. Like, no offense to Texas Tech, not a legendary program. Like, I don't really care how much winning the guy did. I care about how much you contributed to winning. And those aren't the same thing. And Cam was rarely, if ever, the reason that they lost. Again, showed all of those tools, has a good arm, is a very good athlete. He can really do all the things you want him to be able to do. He's the one quarterback in this class to me that is, to a reasonable degree, system agnostic. Shador needs to be in a West Coast offense. He's an accuracy, timing based quarterback. He's a guy who's very smart, knows the game. He's going to make reads and throw it on time on target. You can build off that. And like he'll make some plays and he'll throw it deep, but like that's really where he's going to be in his best position to succeed. Quinn is a much more volatile, much lesser version of that. Cam can do that. You can run a spread. You can run, RPOs. Like you can do a lot of things with Cam Ward. Cam Ward can kind of, to a degree, be a chameleon to your roster, and that gives you a lot more flexibility as far as building a team around him, which is why I think he's should be the first overall pick. I think any team in that range who doesn't have a quarterback would be foolish not to take him, but that's me. Um, I'm sure, especially because they're the Titans, that the Titans aren't going to agree with that. Um, and yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how these first few picks go. But personally, I would be very happy to take him first overall. I think he's easily and clearly the best quarterback in this draft class. I think there's a pretty good sized gap between him and the other two guys in my top three. Speaking of the other two guys in the top three, um, so Jackson Dart's very interesting. The theory crafter in me, the part of me that just enjoys hypothesizing what could be, he's probably my favorite player in the draft. He's not my favorite player in the draft, but like from that perspective, he is. Dart has so many of the things you're looking for a guy at the next level. Moxie, leadership, teammates love him, plays his ass off, chip on his shoulder, hard work, good arm, not like incredible arm, but plenty good enough, good athlete, makes big plays. But then there's also his warts. The turnover benches, again, less so than a guy like yours, but like had some of those fold in the big moments. Some of that comes with a caveat of his coach is Lane Kiffin, and that's kind of Lane's thing. And also, Lane's offense is not really preparing a guy to have like the best success as far as projecting to the NFL. Um, doesn't mean not against Dart as a prospect, but like that's where he kind of comes into being to me. He's the big lottery ticket guy. He's got plenty of talent. Like Dart, Jackson Dart has the talent to be a top 8, top 10 quarterback in the league at any given time. And then from there, it's how much work do you put in? Like Drew Brees is the most accurate quarterback of all time. That's his talent. Everything else was work. And you can make a real argument. Drew's the best quarterback that's ever played, depending on how you define that. Like if you define it as executing the quarterback position, if you define that as on time, on target, like executing the offense, you know, all those types of things, like you can make the argument. He's in that very short conversation, and he was a very short quarterback. Drew's probably 5'11", listed as 6 foot. I don't think he was. Um, but all those other things made up for it. Hard work made up for it. Am I putting Jackson in that conversation? Of course not. But that's why I don't just look at talent. I'm looking at other things as well. So for me, he's a lottery pick guy. A lot of stuff has already started coming out. Teams are seeing that. I've kind of felt this way for quite a while now. I've watched him play a decent amount. I just think there's too many attributes there to like. He makes some really 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 great throws, um, and he seems to have. We'll find out if he does, but he seems to have that desire to be great, and that is, honest to God, it's cliche, but it is typically one of the differentiators of quarterbacks who make it and quarterbacks who don't. There's a difference in having a desire to be great and having an expectation to be great. Which is, for the record, that was the one big concern some people had about Caleb Williams. Next guy on the list, another low for all of the one reason in common, other than that, all of the opposite reasons of Quinn Ewers. There's so many like Bill Polian like douchebags out there that you can't even like say honest comments without it sounding douchebaggish, but I'm gonna say it anyway. My interest in Jalen Milroe is incredibly low at the quarterback position. In a Taysom Hill slash role, I'd consider him in the first. I think he's an incredible talent. He's a beyond electric. He might be like the second or third best running back in this entire class. Like if you're just defining that as guys who are running with the ball in their hands. But he can do quarterback things. He's got arm talent. Now he has smallish hands. He's got really wildly inconsistent mechanics. He doesn't read defenses particularly well, which is one of my big fears with him is when you have inconsistent mechanics and then you don't necessarily make all the best reads. You're relying on talent. And here's this really the number one reason why my interest level on him is so low. It's not the talent, it's sure shit not his character. Like you watch any of the interviews from this kid, he pops off the screen. Like I think he's gonna be taken either sometime in the first or probably in the second round. Someone's gonna take a chance on this kid just because of his character. And it may very well work out. Just because he's gonna put in the work. Absolutely could happen. I don't think the probability of it happening is high enough to invest a premium asset in a guy where the number one, I mean this, the number one most important trait for a quarterback is reliability. You need to be consistent, on time, on target. You cannot run an offense at a high level and be wildly erratic or unreliable. And that's Jalen Milroe's problem. You not only don't know what version of him you're going to get from game to game, but you don't even know from quarter to quarter or snap to snap. Talent wise, make a ton of throws, has plenty of talent, strong enough arm, can throw the ball accurately, can throw some great passes, can do some stuff just with his arm that makes you go, okay, damn. And then what he does with his legs doesn't even need to be discussed. Like, just watch a highlight from him. He's freaking awesome. But the Taysom role exists now. The thing a lot of people forget, they go, oh, that's going to be their Taysom Hill. Okay, cool. So you're going to need a 200 plus pound quarterback who runs a 4.4, is built like a tank, plays hard as fuck, tough as shit. Like, they just don't make a lot of guys. They're like, oh, well, he's a mobile quarterback. He could do some of the Taysom things. Yeah, 4.4. Taysom is not a good athlete for a quarterback. Taysom is a phenomenal athlete for the NFL. Jalen Milroe is going to test like a phenomenal athlete for the NFL. I'd be incredibly interested in him in that kind of role, and I'd be beyond happy for him if he defied the odds and became a starting quarterback. But am I betting on it? No. I just don't see how anybody could justify that. Next guy on the list is Kyle McCord. So interest level is medium. Um, my target around here is actually where I think he'll end up going. I'd be a little surprised if he creeps up boards. So McCord was at Ohio State, transferred over to Syracuse, had a crazy year. So that usually happens. Um, Typically, when something like that happens, it's because you went from a higher level of competition to a lower level of competition. You dominated that lower level of competition. That's it's not really that big of a case. Plus, also like Syracuse is not as much it's not enough more talented than the teams they played. Where like you would have expected this big of a leap, um, in statistics because he blew out of the water anything he'd ever done before. So it's reasonable to assume that it clicked, and that happens sometimes. Like Jaden Daniels was a good, okay college quarterback, and then all of a sudden he was a great college quarterback, and then all of a sudden he was the Heisman Trophy winner, and then all of a sudden he had the best rookie season we've ever seen. I'm not in any way comparing Kyle McCord to Jaden Daniels because the talent gap between them is like between me and fucking Michael Jordan. Okay, it's not that big, but it's pretty fucking big. Um, he has. I mean, he's the first guy we talked about. Like he has some of the similarities with Shador. Like, what does he do well? Well, he plays the quarterback position well. Like that matters. He's accurate. Again, not as accurate as Shador. Um, I worry about his reads sometimes. Really seems to determine some stuff. Like Shador, not a particularly great athlete, not a particularly strong arm. Shador's arm's a lot stronger than McCord's. I actually would consider McCord above the threshold of being able to play quarterback. Like I don't think he's Chad Pennington level of weak arm, um, but he's in the lower end of that threshold for sure. Um, at least from what I've seen. Like sometimes guys come out and all of a sudden they test you work with a trainer and you figure some things out and you shift some mechanics and you find a little extra juice in there and then it's good enough. Like I'm not saying it couldn't happen. Am I willing to predict it would or would I invest a draft pick on it? Not really. Um, I think it's far more likely that his future in the NFL is as a backup than ever being a high level starter. Will Howard. So my interest level is very low because I don't base my entire opinion on a player on their performance in one or two games. I watched Will Howard this season. I was not impressed the vast majority of the season. It's not just the Michigan game. Look, he's a he's a pretty good athlete. For the quarterback position, he's quite the good athlete. Um, he can throw a pretty ball. He threw some beautiful passes in the championship game. He threw some beautiful passes throughout the playoff. It's less of it as a talent issue. It's more of I don't trust a guy that just got hot for a few games where you had an absolutely loaded receiving core, and a lot of times you were just throwing to open guys. Um, and it's not necessarily that just throwing to open guys is a bad thing. You're supposed to throw it to the open man. It's there's too much tape of him being some version of meh and not enough of him being awesome. Where you're looking going, oh, he made that play. And so I just don't think it makes any sense at all to invest a high pick on a guy who had a really hot run and again made some nice passes, but like really go back and think about it. Think of the successful quarterbacks in the NFL. Now think of the national champions over the last 20-ish years. Think of all those Alabama quarterbacks. The only one that's been kind of good is Tua. Hurts went to Oklahoma, and the version of Hurts that was at Alabama and the version that was at Oklahoma are not the same guy. Like Oklahoma helped him get drafted. Matt Weiner, like you can go down that list. There's a lot of guys who like they just yeah, they ended up not being good players. And I think Will Howard is more likely to be one of those guys than he is a really good NFL starter. Because again, like I said with Jalen Milrow, predictability, reliability are the top things, and I don't think he's either. Could be hilariously wrong, but I don't think I am. And then the last guy on the list. So Dylan Gabriel is really interesting. Um, I initially had him as a do not draft player, which would have been below McCord and Howard. And I now have him as a high interest guy, rounds 3 through 5. The reason I think he'll be there, I actually think he'll probably go in that range, but he could very well move up. I think his height's the one thing that holds him back. So my number one reason for not having interest in Dylan Gabriel is it's honestly the height was less of it. It's that Oregon system. The same way, Urban Meyer never drafted an Urban Meyer quarterback. Urban Meyer system, like all of those guys, when he was at Ohio State, when he was at Florida, when he was at Utah, like Alex Smith was the best quarterback out of those guys, and Alex Smith had to be rebuilt from the ground up. And he was a solid quarterback, but not great. Like there's just certain systems where like this just does not produce good quarterbacks for the NFL. And largely that Oregon system has been that way. I know it's not the same as when Chip Kelly was there, but they do, a lot of the same, stuff is still there. And, there's a lot of that whole you have so much more talent than a lot of the rest of the Pac-12. How much of this is just guy got ball into hands of playmaker, 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage. Playmaker runs for 70 yards, quarterback gets 70 passing yards. Like there was a lot of that. That's actually not Dylan Gabriel. One, he is a legitimate dual threat quarterback. Like he is a good enough athlete. Like you're not necessarily going to design stuff for him, but if there's a breakdown, he can take off and he can take off and hurt you. Quite a lot actually. Um, which is obviously that's just a plus. But he's not a guy who's just going to run to run. He'll run to throw. He has strong enough arm. Again, it's doesn't have Patrick's arm. He doesn't have Josh Allen's arm, and that's okay. It's a strong enough arm. Get it down the field, 45, 55 plus. You throw it down there and doesn't have to like hop, 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 throw it with his whole heart and soul. He can get it down there. Like, 3 step drop, 4 step drop, 5 step drop, etc. Has the intermediate velocity, which is something he showed at the Senior Bowl. And again, also shows up when I rewatched him because again, I had him as a no touchy, and I'm actually pleasantly surprised. Here's my crazy prediction. Um, and then I'm gonna give, and I saved this for the last because it's a completely absurd fucking hot take. Um, of one of the guys we already talked about. So my prediction is I think Dylan Gabriel is going to be the guy that Sean McVay or Kyle Shanahan or one of those guys is going to get their hands on him in the second or the third round, or even McDaniels, like over in Miami. Adam on the Saints Buck Party podcast said this, you know, be a perfect backup for Tua. It was like, oh well, lefty, accurate. Like you can see some of the similarities. Honestly, I think Dylan's got a much stronger arm than Tua, but I also just think he's more like I think he's more decisive than Tua, which I think is interesting. Again, I care less about the 5'11" thing. A because he's got a strong enough arm, but also like he's a good enough athlete, and he's shown the ability to you know beat Ohio State, which was a very talented team. Like beat these good teams. Um, at the collegiate level, at that height, showing the other components. I'm not super worried. So my prediction, I always take forever to get to my points, is I think there's a real shot that he ends up being like one of the major steals of this draft. Like, I think one of those coaches who knows what the heck they're doing with quarterbacks, who can also like put weapons around a guy so they get their hands on him, and he's going to be really, really sneaky good for a really long time. And here's my hot take. So I'm not a big make comps guy. Like it's just not my thing. Um, here's who I think Jackson Dart actually reminds me of a lot. They're not one to ones as far as prospects. And again, I'm talking about a prospect, not the version of this player you're going to think about is the multi-time MVP, full-time conspiracy theorist, complete whack job whose family doesn't want to talk to him. Aaron Rodgers. Jackson Dart has a lot of Aaron Rodgers. From the athleticism, being a way better athlete than you think he is, how he runs, the way and when he runs, the throwing on the move. Now, Aaron has a much stronger arm than Jackson because Aaron has a phenomenal arm. Let's also remember, though, in those years Aaron was sitting behind Favre, he rebuilt all of his mechanics. Aaron in college, again, very good player, better than Jackson, but I see a lot of parallels between them as players, stylistically. Some of the ways they play, some of the ways they run, some of the way they move. There's a shadow there to me. Um, does that mean he's going to become a first ballot Hall of Famer? Of course not. Hopefully, he has nothing else other than like some resemblance to Aaron, who's more than kind of a giant douchebag, but on and off the field, never has fault all that. But just as a prospect, as a talent, that's my scorching hot take. I actually think Jackson Dart has some real parallels to Aaron Rodgers. And that's my take on this year's quarterbacks class. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, subscribe, hit the notification bell, drop a comment. Actually, comments, even if you just put a hoot at or Pro Bowl or pick your favorite quarterback, anything you want in the comment section. It actually helps more people see the video. It's always appreciated. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any thoughts or disagree with me on anything, feel free to leave it in the comments. And more draft conversations to come.